Hi, Mickey.
Hello.
Hey, Mickey, you're flossing on camera. That's a first.
Haven't you heard the news, Bob?
About dental floss?
Yeah. No, about gum disease.
Oh.
Gum disease causes Alzheimer's.
Oh, does it? Well, that explains a lot.
And I don't want to get Alzheimer's, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to be flossing this entire podcast. I floss 24/7 now. I can never stop.
You know, a weird thing about me that makes me very happy to hear this news is that although my teeth are like a disaster area, they're like eligible for federal funding probably, dentists do comment on my gums being fundamentally in good shape. They do. That explains my alertness and my sharpness.
My teeth are like the Golden Gate Bridge. Once I reach the end, I have to start all over again at the other end.
You're talking about painting the Golden Gate Bridge. That's what they used to say about painting, that they would say they painted it all the time, which they more or less did because they had to sandblast it. It's a big bridge. I used to live there, you know.
As you know, I'm developing the early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease.
I realize that, yes. We've discussed that, have we not? You wouldn't remember, but we have, yes.
I have to eat some shit today, and I distinctly remember I had to eat some shit a few weeks ago, but I forget what it was about. That's how effectively I ate the shit.
Not so long ago, you had to eat shit about replacement theory. Are you having to eat shit about the 10-year-old's abortion this time?
Oh, that was it. Yeah, serious.
That's this week.
The replacement theory was replacement theory.
Oh, okay, No, the 10-year-old is this week.
I think it was. Yeah, because it was a serious deal. Sorry,
I shouldn't laugh about either of these subjects. I'm not. I'm laughing about the state of your brain, which I shouldn't laugh about either. None of this is funny. I don't know what's going on.
The abortion story, which I was wrong about, was there was a story in the Indy Star saying that there was a doctor in Indianapolis who performed an abortion for a 10-year-old who had to travel from Ohio because she'd been raped, but she was 3 days late for the Ohio law. So Indiana abortions were legal, so she had to travel, and various this went spread, even though it was just the lead of the piece, it was just a couple of paragraphs, spread like wildfire, and it made it all the way into Joe Biden's speech and all this poor 10-year-old, and then a blogger, a tweeter on the right began to raise doubts about it, pointing out that you're required to file a police report, and there was no police report filed. So,
there was the theory that maybe the whole thing was fabricated?
Well, I thought maybe the whole thing, that this child didn't exist. Yes, I bought into it that much. I wouldn't have bet on it, but I definitely made jokes about how it was Jimmy's World too. The Janet Cook story.
There's something we'll have to explain for our younger viewers probably, but that was a Washington Post story that turned out to be fake after he won the Pulitzer Prize, but go ahead.
Right. Anyway, and then like Obama's birth certificate, right after not just me, but Fox and Jim Jordan and various high political officials, Kristi Noem had gone much further than I did, just said it was false. Although I went too far, said it was false. Like Obama's birth certificate, the police arrested the rapist, and he's. So anyway, so this the abortion doctor is vindicated. She apparently did actually perform the abortion. One questionable, there are a couple of still questionable aspects of it. One is, how can you tell if somebody's 3 days past 6 weeks? You really can't, I don't think, with any precision. So,
Mickey, if I got to let go of this one, but go ahead.
No.
What are the new doubts?
But if you're a doctor, you don't want to take the risk, right? That some vindictive prosecutor is going to go after you. So, there's that. And the Ohio law, the Ohio authorities will say, well, she could have had one here. There's a provision for, where it's risky to the mother or might cause irreversible damage. Well, you don't want to take that risk either. I mean, you have to prove that it would cause irreversible damage. It's not like a blanket exception for rape. Boom, you're okay. Mm-hmm. But the weird thing is, why did they delay so long in filing the charges? And it does not seem to be the leading suspect in this, and I don't know what the situation is. The leading suspect in this is not that he was an illegal immigrant, and people were worried that if he's, he might be deported. Although if he's convicted, he's going to spend a long time in prison. So there's that was my first thought. But then there was this Univision interview with the mother where she said, "My daughter's okay. He's a fine man. Everything they're saying about him is lies." So she has seems to have some, at the moment, affection and loyalty to this guy who's accused. So how is it one of these complicated family situations where, there's a little incest in the family, and is it why did the charges get filed? Did the charges get filed because there was such a brouhaha over this thing that she didn't want to file, that they sort of made her file them, or could they file them on their own?
Well, first of all, I mean, they're not saying this was just statutory rape, right? It isn't just by virtue of the child's age.
Unclear.
Oh, well, that would explain everything, right?
Some of the stories use the word attacked, which would imply rape, as some failed Republican Senate candidate famously said. But I haven't seen any real allegations that it was anything other than statutory rape. So anyway, that's the story. I was wrong. I bid on a conspiracy theory I shouldn't have bid on. It was a fun conspiracy theory while it lasted. It was similar to Obama's birth certificate in that that was always crazy. That was never a plausible conspiracy theory, but they waited and waited and waited, then lowered the boom on the conspiracy theorists. Anyway, that's what I have to eat shit about.
Well, Mickey, speaking of puzzling expressions of forgiveness by family members of victims, how's that for a segue?
Are you okay? I wonder where this is going, but go ahead.
I hadn't planned to bring this up this early, and we don't need to get it into much. There's this headline in the Atlantic today. Jamal Khashoggi would, quote, forgive, unquote, MBS, his widow says. Now, interestingly, this is from the Atlantic. Okay, it's an Atlantic headline.
Who wrote the story?
Well, Graham Wood, who has a past that I'd be happy to talk about either now or in the Parrot Room. I'm not saying it's a bad past, but it's a past. It's a prominent past. And the editor of the Atlantic is Jeffrey Goldberg. Interestingly, today is the day. If you're somebody who wants to see the U.S. and Saudi Arabia mend their relationship, today is the day you would want this published. And it turns out the interview it's based on was done last month. That's weeks ago. And
so they held it.
They held it. They held it for the
prominent news page. I can't blame them for that.
That's one theory. But do you sit on it's news? It was news when they got it. That's news. Doesn't the journalist go with news? The Atlantic, it's not like it's a monthly anymore, Mickey.
Well, it's a question. Were they saving it for the magazine? That's an interesting question.
I don't think it's in the magazine. Look, I have a more nefarious theory, but we'll save it for the Parrot Room. Apparently, it hasn't occurred to you.
Well, the various theory is that he wanted to boost MBS.
This is like... This is the first bank of the triple bank shot.
Okay.
You've gotten that far.
We'll
talk about it in the Parrot Room.
I want to know what Mike Isikoff's podcast says about this, because he had apparently a very good, 9-part series on Khashoggi, pointing out it was all much more complicated than we thought. I mean, he was playing footsie with all sides, apparently.
Well, then I say chop him up, Mickey. If he was playing footsie with all sides.
He always leaped to the extreme conclusion, anti-Mickey conclusion.
Go ahead, sorry.
My instinct, my first thought is, was this woman a plant all along? Did you lure Khashoggi to his death?
Ooh, that's good. I like that.
Under orders from MBS, and now she's continuing to follow orders from MBS.
Huh. I like that. Let's go with that one.
Let's see what Isikoff has to say about this. He has slightly better instincts than I do.
In fact, hasn't he
much better instincts.
Hasn't he renounced his connection to Russiagate?
he has renounced part of it. Yes, that's what I was thinking. He still has much better instincts than I do. But
well, not many Russiagate enthusiasts have kind of said, "Okay, I got some of this wrong." Right? You got to give him credit for that.
I do. He's an honest guy. Yeah,
we do.
But anyway, that's very interesting. It rings false to me. Somebody chopping up into little pieces, I wouldn't forgive them. Just saying.
It does seem weird, right? Now, I haven't even read the thing. They may have taken it out of context, but I mean, first of all, it's hard to believe that he actually would. If you're the person who's chopped up, no way. So I don't know where, I don't know where, look, I suppose she's in better position to judge than me, but I got to say, this whole thing.
Maybe she doesn't want to get chopped up,
I don't think it's that. I don't think she has to worry about that. That would be pretty suspicious.
You don't have the conspiratorial mind.
Not quite. Well, actually, I do. We'll talk about that in the Parrot Room.
You blame everything on a failure of cognitive empathy. I blame a conspiracy.
I do. By the way, also, on this Saudi thing, here's another, a related conspiracy theory. Okay, so you're familiar with this Saudi-sponsored golf tour that's now trying to steal players from the PGA and ultimately destroy the PGA. It seems to be a whitewashing effort, a reputation washing effort by MBS. It's being paid for by the Saudi, sovereign wealth funds. The Saudi government's paying for this. And it turns out the Biden administration is investigating the PGA for antitrust violation because they have suspended players who jumped. I mean, I guess they're completing the jump in a sense. These guys said, we're signing up with the Saudi League. We're playing, that means they're playing 14 tournaments a year, which is pretty much, the better part of a season for practical purposes. And so the PGA said, well, then you're suspended. Now, the Biden administration is investigating the PGA for antitrust violations. I'm not saying that's a crazy thing to do, but I am saying that given Biden's apparent determination to suck up to Saudi Arabia in all means always possible. He even did a fist bump with MBS. Did you see that? Supposedly he was going to avoid the photo op where he's greeting him physically, but he did a fist bump. They
avoided a handshake and settled on a fist bump.
That doesn't help. That doesn't help. So
it wasn't a hearty fist bump, but it wasn't a hostile fist bump.
Now, so are we skeptical of this antitrust? Is Biden?
That's interesting. Of course, I'm skeptical. I mean, since it turns out the IRS is auditing everybody on the whims of political higher ups, why shouldn't the antitrust division file the antitrust charges? And there's a history of politicization of that too, dating back to Felix Roten and AT&T. So I think there's a plausible alternative explanation, which is this is probably the sort of standard practice that gets you sued for antitrust, gets you investigated for antitrust violations.
Yeah,
probably a textbook case. If you block an Uber driver from also driving from Lyft, they're going to be investigating that.
Right. The slightly odd thing about this as an antitrust case, I'm not saying it's crazy as an antitrust case, but the wrinkle, and I can't figure out how this should figure into the logic of an antitrust case, is that in truth, this rival league, it's LIV in capital letters, which means 45 in Roman numerals, but people are just calling it LIV. It's because it's the 45 that is apparently the basis of it.
The 45th anniversary of what?
It's 54. It's 54.
It's the 54th anniversary of what?
They played 54 holes instead of 72. Fascinating.
Oh, okay.
But the funny thing is, normally in an antitrust case, the company being accused is constraining the competitive activity of a rival company. But in this case, the LIV League is not in any meaningful sense a rival commercial enterprise. They're not going to make money. They're paying ridiculous quantities. They're just showering these guys in money. They have almost no revenue. I suppose there's a super long shot chance that they could just ultimately blow the PGA out of the water, lower the amount they're paying these guys, and then break even in 12 years or something. But that's a long shot. For practical purposes, it doesn't make sense to think of this as a commercial enterprise.
I still think, I don't think it matters if they could destroy the PGA. Why wouldn't that be their rivals? They're, I don't think antitrust is, you have to look at the profit sheet and see if somebody's going to make a profit anyway.
They are rivals. It's just that ordinarily in an antitrust case, like with Microsoft and Netscape, the idea is Netscape is this company. And if we want the magic of the marketplace to work, companies that have a good product should be able to do well. Well, this isn't a company. They're not even trying to make money. It's just a guy who has access to billions and billions of dollars trying to whitewash his reputation after he had a guy chopped up.
I just don't think that makes a difference. My grandmother used to put on a classical chamber music series in Los Angeles called the Music Guild. It's still alive. And she would get guys like the Juilliard, the top string quartets, for a very small amount, like $2,000 or something. Then this place called Ambassador College, which was never going to make money, started spending millions of dollars to lure chamber music acts across town. And the Juilliard suddenly started charging hundreds of thousands of dollars, and my grandmother couldn't compete. Did it matter to my grandmother whether the Ambassador College was making money or not? No. The damage is the same. There's some acts that are per se violations, regardless of all these things.
This is different. In this case, the one being accused is the one who is making money, at least now. And the one who's supposedly the victim company is not really a company. They are not part of the marketplace.
I think the victims are the golfers.
Well, there's that too. And in that sense, it's like baseball's reserve clause case, which famously led to the current free agent concept.
It's like when Steve Jobs used to send an email to a rival company saying, "Why are you recruiting this guy? I'm just going to have to pay him more." Well, who's the victim there? The victim is the guy that Steve Jobs stops from getting a job offer.
Yeah, no, that is the stronger case. Now, there is already a viable rival league. The European League is a real commercial endeavor, and these guys can play for the European League. But I would just close by saying, I repeat my call to the PGA. If you're listening, Jay, whatever the name of the head of the PGA is, I'm going to say this one more time and one more time only. If you can get people to refer to this rival golf circuit as the bone saw golf circuit, all your worries are over. I mean, seriously.
No, because the widow has forgiven everybody.
She says that Jamal would forgive the rival golf circuit if he were alive today.
Right, he would be playing on it.
He didn't look like a golfer to me, but you never know. A lot of people don't.
So you were making a transition as if we had important things to talk about.
We have yet to talk about anything important, and how far are we into this? Let's go ahead and set a record.
Abortion is important. It does seem to be damaging the Republicans as predicted, and rightly so.
Oh, does it? Is there evidence?
It's mild. Yeah, the generic ballot is narrowing, and there are a couple recent ones that have the Democrats ahead. Now, the trick with the generic ballot is the Democrats are always ahead. So if the Democrats are 2 points ahead, it's really tied. The Democrats have to be way ahead to be really ahead.
And what's the number this time?
It's hard to tell. The number is the Republicans are ahead, but that's on the basis of the older polls. Once they drop out, it'll be about even, I think. There are all these things. There are all these forces conspiring to, as we talked about this a bit last week, conspiring to deny Democrats, deny Republicans their obvious gimme layup of winning the midterms. One is this abortion thing. The other is if inflation abates, and we can talk about that. But some of the core indexes seem to be going down. Not all of them, but the Fed maintains one that's supposed to track core inflation like moment by moment, and that one is apparently going down. The others are not going down.
Today was a good news day on a slightly different front, but the Dow went up hundreds of points because the consumer spending number was robust.
Oh, okay. The third thing is the Republicans have nothing to say if inflation does go down. They're even avoiding obvious hot button issues like crime, wokeism, immigration, because They want to cut an amnesty deal later because they're sellouts. And the biggest thing is Trump has now confirmed this week that he wants to declare, and he wants to declare before the midterms. So that has to cost the Republicans another few percentage points.
You mean the fact that he's saying he's going to declare, Will?
It makes the race about Trump. It means here the Republicans are trying to ignore Trump and make it about the inflation, and all of a sudden Trump comes in, and the Democrats will say, you like Trump or not like Trump? If you don't like Trump, you better vote Democratic. Well, that will have some traction.
Isn't it possible that all the January 6th publicity has made the generic ballot question more about Trump
I think
than it otherwise would be?
I think that's true too. And we could talk about January 6th too. So which do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about January 6th a little. So this week's hearing wasn't revelatory because the thing it focused on had been pretty well reported in the media, I gather, but it's still worth noting that in December, 18th or something, late December, Trump was very seriously considering having the military seize the ballot boxes.
Yes, but on the other hand, there are all these people saying this was the turning point when because at the end of it, he sent out a tweet saying, come on January 6th, it'll be wild, at the end of this tumultuous meeting. But also at the end of it, he decided not to call out the military. So, it's evidence of his bad judgment, but also of, thank God, some vestige of good judgment. They sort of ignore that part, and they focus on the tweet. Then he sends out the tweet, and some crazy oath keepers, interpret this as this means you must go kill everybody in the Capitol, and somehow Trump is to blame for them coming to that interpretation. That's the key disconnect they still haven't bridged. The fact that Trump tweets this and they interpret it as a call to violence does not mean Trump meant it as a call to violence, or that by any reasonable definition of the term, it was a call to violence.
Well, but meanwhile, first of all, as for him deciding not to send the troops out to seize ballot boxes, that apparently took 6 hours to convince him. This meeting lasted 6 hours.
Well,
it started with Michael Flynn and what's her name, the crazy lawyer woman, and the head of Overstock.com, Sidney Powell, they somehow wormed their way in the Oval Office, and they're trying to convince him to do this. And then sensible people hear about this, and they descend on him. And then Rudy gets involved, and it takes 6 hours to convince Trump this is a bad idea. Okay, but you're right. He finally agrees it. Well, I think what he concludes is it won't work. But anyway, so then he sends this tweet. But it's not as if this tweet is the only evidence that Trump intended to use January 6th to actually subvert the process.
What's the other evidence?
Well, it's just been slowly accumulating in the course of these hearings. And in fact, I would say for one thing, one little data point is that I think emerged from this week's hearing is that in Trump's speech, one of the lawyers, Hirschman, is that his name? What's his name? Is there a lawyer named? Hirschman.
There is.
Had them take the references to Mike Pence out of the speech. So Trump gets a draft, I guess, of the speech. It has all the references to Mike Pence out of them. Lawyer says, bad idea. Trump insists on reinserting one or two references and then ad-libs like another half dozen. Okay?
It's pretty clear he wanted to put pressure on Mike Pence.
Right.
That's what
we're talking about.
Right, but if you might want to put pressure on Mike Pence by saying we have 100,000 people outside and they all disagree with you and they're chanting and you want to piss these people off. It's not that they're going to storm the Capitol.
Exactly. Isn't that an attempt to subvert the constitutionally ordained? What do you call that? If he wants to,
no, because he was convinced. That assume it's a crime to have this interpretation of the Constitution that Pence has no authority. We're about to pass a law to make it clear.
Okay.
It implies it's a little unclear now. You don't convict people of crimes for something that's unclear. If it's clear that he wanted Pence to do something that was wrong, which you could prove it was wrong, that the electors were fairly elected. Sure, but you want to show that Trump intended them to be violent, and that's the link they haven't shown. Their best evidence is this Bannon phone call the day before, but they don't have that yet.
Which is
that
what?
Would be good evidence.
What? So they know there was a phone call between Trump and Bannon?
Yes, they know there was a phone call on the 5th, after which Bannon went on the radio and said, "It's not going to go down like you think it's going to go down, people. It's all sorts of things implying that there's going to be something very, not just it's going to be wild, but something very dramatic." I think this is after talking to Trump. So that's, what did he say to Trump? That's this is before Trump gives the speech. That's
right.
That's, seems like that's the crucial evidence they don't have.
Well, fine. But to get back to Pence, I mean, yeah, I would love to know what that is. As you know, I've long thought Bannon is central to this, if only in the obvious sense that, I mean, his public activity makes him central as a practical matter. The question of what he was doing behind the scenes only, adds to the intrigue. But as for Pence, I mean, there's two reasons you could indict Trump, at least in the moral sense. One is, as you said, to try to get Pence to do something illegal. The other is to get Pence to decide what he's going to do under physical coercion, under physical threat. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is significant that after they breached the Capitol, Trump is not only not doing anything to stop it, which was within his power, he is tweeting that incredibly inciting tweet about basically saying Mike Pence is a traitor. Okay?
I agree that that's evidence.
Okay.
But you ideally want evidence of his state of mind before then, because he could just say, "Oh, they're going after Mike Pence. Yeah. Well, good for them." I mean, I suddenly realized they're going after Mike Pence. So you have to rule out that possibility.
You would like as much evidence as possible, but I thought I heard you earlier saying, well, all they've got is this tweet from December 18th or 19th when he says, "Come see me on January 6th."
No, we have seen the accumulation of all kinds of circumstances. That's all they have out of that meeting.
Yeah,
I think that's what we were talking about. I think there may be a charge that doesn't require that much proof, which is a conspiracy to disrupt the constitutional duties, and that doesn't mean you necessarily want. That could just encompass postpone it, delay it, fuck it up.
But
but I mean, this is all irrelevant. We already have enough to know that he should never be president again. We already have enough to know.
Some of us had that 6 years ago.
I know. We already have enough to impeach him. They're probably not going to charge him, so who cares? And the big thing is they're damaging him further. And so that's all true.
Well, as a political matter, that's very important. If they're damaging him, there is a separate question of what did he do? What could he be convicted of doing? But I just want to say one more thing on this, which it only occurred to me today, and I must be the last person in America for this insight to dawn on. And it wasn't even mine. I heard somebody else say it on a podcast, but it really hadn't occurred to me. I mean, when he was sitting there in the White House while all hell is breaking loose in Congress on January 6th, and people have, kind of thought like what was going on in his head? Why didn't he do something to stop it? Oddly, I'm sure you've thought of this and everybody else has, but today was the first day I thought, well, he still thought he was in it. It was working. He's like, okay, we've delayed the vote. This is the plan. We've disrupted the vote, and we're gonna keep disrupting it. And like he didn't have a clear idea of how it was going to unfold. I'm sure Bannon had a clearer one, but he's like, yeah, let's go with it. It's working so far. This is part of the plan. I mean, he had not given up at that point. I had never before seriously thought that he still hadn't given up on remaining president, but he probably hadn't.
I'm like you. I thought he'd given up at that point, but you're right. He might not have. The key question, obvious key question is, what did he want to do when he got to the Capitol? We still don't know. We still don't know very much about that. Bannon may know. Rudy may know. He's talked about how the president's going to be there in the House and talking to the members, and at some point, he's going to say, "Okay, you won't go along with me. Release the Kraken," and people storm the Capitol. I mean, what was,
It honestly would not shock me if his plan was to say, "Okay, now let's go in and tell them in person how we feel and lead them into the Capitol." That would not shock me. Nothing.
No, that wouldn't shock me at all. I mean, very little would shock me. Him strangling Mike Pence with his bare hands might shock me.
Yeah, he's germophobic. He would have somebody else do it.
But also, he kept reaching for the clavicle. You don't want to reach for the clavicle.
He would never reach for somebody's clavicle. No, there's no testimony to that effect.
Anyway, I just think that, as usual, they've made progress. They certainly damaged him a lot, but the press has to go that extra step further and make more of it than there is. We do not have evidence he sent the mob to ransack the Capitol. The evidence, he sent the mob. We don't know what they were doing there. There was a permit for an event, so they have to make a big deal. The press has to make a big deal of this march. This march was illegal, but there was a rally planned at the other end. So, and they knew that there was going to be a march, and they knew it was illegal. They were trying to hide it from the park police. Obviously, if you have 1 million people on the mall and an event on Capitol Hill, they're going to march to Capitol Hill. I mean, duh. So they don't have a permit.
Was the first formal appeal, first out loud appeal to do that during the speech? It wasn't already the plan? I mean, wasn't Bannon saying, then we'll go to the Capitol? Or
Bannon may have been saying it, but that's used as aha, we got you. You did intend to march to the Capitol all along. Well, yeah, obviously. There was another rally there. Of course they're going to march to the Capitol. I just don't think he has to show that he wanted them to march to the Capitol and attack the Capitol, which is entirely plausible. It's just they don't have that evidence, and people assert that they did, and they make a big deal of the march when the march is just a march. He wanted them to march, yeah, but they were,
So are you saying the march was technically illegal because they needed some permit?
Well, they needed a permit, yeah. I mean, but that's true of half the anti-war marches I've ever been on. You have 1 million people and you decide to go somewhere. That's a march, Yeah. You don't have a permit.
No, I don't think we can lock him up for that. But
anyway, it does seem to be doing its work in terms of driving down his support. So I guess I have to say that they're doing God's work, much as I hate to admit it.
In other words, helping DeSantis be the nominee. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, that's the most likely outcome, but it could be anybody else.
I mean, that's the irony, is the Democratic candidate would probably have a better chance of beating Trump, but it's not a risk I want to take. I'm just happy to sideline him and see what happens.
Byron York had the great crazy idea.
Which is that it just might work.
That it just might work. Pelosi thought you could impeach Trump after he was president. So go ahead, impeach him again, right now. Have a trial, impeach him, forbid him from running for office again.
But you can't impeach him.
It would pass. It got 57 Republican votes last time. It might get 66 this time.
How you can impeach somebody who's no longer president? That's crazy.
I think she made that argument. She certainly tried to convict somebody who was no longer president. He was impeached on the 13th of January. By the time they had the trial, he was no longer president. So it's just another extension of that logic to say that you could impeach. That's why it's an idea so crazy. But I think if you bought Pelosi's most extreme arguments, this would be possible.
Yeah. I would just stick with these hearings, drag them out, do an episode every 10 days or so.
Well, they're obviously going to drag them up right until the election.
I would hope.
I mean,
but they got to keep coming up with good stuff. If the plot starts to trail off, they're not helping themselves.
Well, the plot's already started to trail off after Cassidy Hutchinson, but we have Bannon. Bannon's going to do something.
But do you think he'll speak openly? I mean, the trouble is, he's a hostile witness. He's not going to rat on Trump. Now, Pat Cipollone could be interesting.
Well, he's already testified,
but not. We haven't seen any of it, have we?
No, but if anything dramatic would leave. The key thing there is they didn't. His testimony he was allegedly had some testimony to give that might have contradicted Cassidy Hutchinson about the blow up in the van at the Secret Service, and they didn't ask him about it because they learned ahead of time that he didn't remember it, and they didn't want anything that contradicted Cassidy Hutchinson, their star witness. So they just didn't ask about it. That's not good faith, investigating.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
So, Mickey, do you know how many times? Probably hasn't happened more than a couple times, but I have said it has happened at least twice on this podcast. I have said in the course of just ranting about Joe Manchin, I'd throw in, and if it weren't for him, we could tax the rich. And you always say, no, he's in favor of taxing the rich. And yet, Mickey, this week, he sabotaged a Democratic attempt to tax the rich. Did he not?
I don't quite understand it. He changed his mind about taxing the rich and spending on green energy, blah, blah, a bunch of subsidies to support fighting climate change. And how is taxing the rich inflationary? I don't quite understand it.
It's the opposite of inflationary. If you don't, especially if you don't spend the money.
And if the overall package adds to the is anti-deficit, it adds to the surplus or creates a surplus. How is it inflationary, even if it involves a bit of spending?
Yeah, spending.
I don't quite understand that.
Spending without getting commensurate revenue is inflationary. Deficit spending. This is.
I guess you could argue that the revenue raising is off in the future, and the spending is right now, and inflation is right now. So it'll be inflationary right now. Even if inflationary expectations are lowered by some tax increases in the future that may never happen if the Republicans get back in power.
Well, is that what these would have been off in the future?
I don't know. I'm just speculating why his position might be at all plausible. On the other hand, if the Democrats just bite their tongue and pass the things he's willing to pass, that'd be pretty successful. If you look back on, it would completely, it seems to be, destroy any idea that it was a do-nothing Congress or that we're in permanent polarized paralysis. They would have passed, the stimulus bill, the infrastructure bill, a little bit of gun control, the Medicare. The big components that he's willing to pass are some giving Medicare power to negotiate drug prices. I don't particularly like that, but it's a big thing. And the fifth thing is this AC fix on the Obamacare, which is not really quite a victory because it's fixing a flaw in the bill that was in Obamacare that was there from the beginning, arguably the Democrats' fault. So they're just going back and repairing their own mistakes. But it's not nothing,
No. And so the Democrats are not going to do that? They're not going to just take.
No, I think they will do that. I think they will try to do that. Then Manchin may double cross them again, but they're going to try to do that. But the point is that that's another factor that could help them in the midterm. Mm-hmm. If they actually calm down and instead of railing against Manchin, say, okay, we have another solid chunk of achievement here. We're getting things done. Reelect us, we'll get some more done. I mean, that's not a crazy pitch,
Yeah, I guess that's true. So what else? What about this crazy Elon Musk?
I still hold out hope that he's just trying to negotiate down the price. As the venom flies, it becomes harder and harder to believe that that's actually going to happen.
Well,
it's clearly in the interest of everybody to settle at a slightly lower figure. Otherwise, the only people there to get the money are the lawyers.
Well, no,
Twitter's going to be degraded, and
no. No, here's the thing. I mean, one thing I hadn't really understood until recently is that, this idea that he can pay them $1 billion and walk away from the deal, that's not really true. He can only do that under he only has even that option under certain circumstances. It's not clear those circumstances apply. So what he may be negotiating for is the ability to just pay them $2.5 billion and walk away. Twitter may demand that to let him even walk away. So
I thought that the chances that the court would require him to actually purchase it, so-called specific performance, were small.
I think they're not high. On the other hand, there was a New York Times op-ed yesterday from somebody making the case that, it happens and they should do it. Now, if they did it, then the only negotiation left to be had would be how much he pays them to just walk away. Because then if he does the deal, he's got to pay the whatever it is, 5421. Is 421 the marijuana number? Can you believe that he picks these? I mean, this is real money we're talking about. There's a lot of shares. When you add it up, to pick the number you offer to pay them on the basis of whether it is the official, code for marijuana, that's kind of nuts. Anyway, so where was I? Anyway, I think there's a chance that they'll force him. This is, I think, not a jury trial, right? It's just a judge. These judges specialize in corporate stuff.
They're very experienced.
And I think it sounds like a case. This is Delaware, right? I mean, corporate stuff is their business. And I think some of these judges feel like, every once in a while, you got to send a message that we're not joking around. You sign a contract, blah, blah, blah. This is a prominent, high-profile case. Good time a perfect opportunity to send a message. Wouldn't totally shock me if they compelled him to go through with the deal at the agreed upon price. Then he's got to either do that or pay Twitter more than $1 billion to walk away.
I certainly hope he ends up with Twitter because or destroys Twitter in the process of this lawsuit, because
destroys. You don't want Twitter destroyed.
Well, something else will crop up to take its place, and presumably it might have less censorship. I don't think it's a hard technology to devise now that Twitter has done it. It just has the first mover advantage. So, but the Twitter is back to its old ways, and
well, what's it censoring?
The same thing that's always censored, I think. Green stuff, climate denial, transphobia.
See, but the untold story is that
every week there's another one.
When it comes to foreign policy, it's, if anything, right-wing or at least hawkish censorship.
Well, that's bad too.
Yeah, I think I alluded to this in the Parrot Room last week, but there was this guy named, I think, McLeod, who wrote a piece about this in Mint Press, which is actually one of these organizations that periodically gets kicked off of these places because it's kind of a, lefty, hard left. Anyway, he argues, and it seems like he knows what he's talking about, that more and more Facebook and Twitter is hiring, to help them do their content moderation, this, that. They're hiring former FBI agents. I think partly because they want to make sure they stay in the good graces of the U.S. government. If the U.S. government says, hey, these guys are terrorists, they want to err on the side of compliance. But anyway, he gave an example. This is the part I think I mentioned last week in the Parrot Room. First, Facebook, there was an election in Nicaragua. There were these pro-Sandinista accounts. And Facebook declares that they're bots and kicks them off the platform. Then all these people show up on Twitter with videos of themselves saying, I'm a Nicaraguan. I'm not a bot. I'm the real thing. I was kicked off of Facebook. And Twitter kicks them all off, supposedly, according to this guy's story. But, you also see Facebook more than complying with government requirements about terrorist organizations in terms of when Trump declares the Iranian Revolutionary Guard terrorist organization, which was, everybody thought this is weird. It's a state military outfit, but he did it. Facebook complied with that in a heartbeat, but Facebook goes further, and they pick people that the government hasn't declared terrorists, and just for good measure, they kick them off the platform. All of this bears watching. I worry that Elon Musk won't watch that part.
You know who has a very healthy and very clear line on Musk and censorship and why he's needed at Twitter? David Sachs, your friend.
I just had him on my podcast.
Right. I watched the podcast.
Yeah.
I watched the podcast. You're like this. It's not publicized on your site. I had to go Google it.
What do you mean it's not publicized on your site?
I went to Nonzero. I couldn't find it. It's not there, I don't think.
Well, on my newsletter, on Nonzero newsletter?
Anyway.
It's on the Nonzero podcast feed and
okay.
Nonzero YouTube channel.
It should be everywhere. Anyway, it's a very good interview, but you didn't get into his views on Musk and censorship. And also, I wonder what he thinks of the merger. You should go back and ask him.
I think he was pro-merger, just judging by things he had said on his own podcast.
I think he was too. Yeah, I heard him on the All In.
He
podcast.
had ideas about how Musk could cut costs and stuff. And also, I heard him on Barry Weiss's podcast. And listen, I hate to hear myself even say what I just heard myself say, which is that I listened to Barry Weiss's podcast, but I did, and he was talking about speech codes, deplatforming, and he actually has. This is David Sachs. He actually has, well thought out. He's looked into the whole issue of free speech, and it sounds like he has clear ideas about how you would go about policing speech on a platform in a way that is guided by basic principles and so on. It wouldn't be like, Musk himself, when they ask him about this stuff, he's like, well. If it was really bad, you probably wouldn't let that on. It was like incredibly vague and ill thought out.
Musk seems to be winging it, yes, even if he's not. Sachs is so impressive. He's right on foreign policy. He's right on censorship. He should run for president. We'll fill in the rest of his platform for him. But, he can just, emphasize those things. And he talks clearly. He's a sensible person. Seems balanced. Way too balanced to run for president, of course. He's rich. He can fund himself. There are very few heroes in our time, Bob.
He's a hero. A commenter on YouTube actually said that same thing under the podcast. Why doesn't this guy run for president? Was that you?
No. But you're listening to these people on his All In podcast, blabber, 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 and he comes in and he's like the voice of reason and clarity. So,
he's clearly kind of the alpha on that podcast.
He's the alpha, really?
Yeah, well, he's the only one whose name is actually mentioned in the lead into the podcast, in the kind of musical intro thing.
That's because they can't pronounce the other guy's name.
Jason Calacanis?
No,
I just did. There's several guys. There's a bunch of guys.
The guy was going to run for governor of California. And that's it.
Wasn't that you? No, that was Senate.
So the
what
guy
else?
with an Asian sounding name.
It was Ukraine.
Well, there's one little bit of congressional cleanup is they've decided to push through this massive chip subsidy. Apart from it was embedded in this overall competitiveness bill. I don't know what else was in the bill, but there was a massive subsidy for the U.S. chip industry. And Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, and others are going around issuing these incredible ultimatums. You must vote for this now, or we will lose to China. The chip companies next week are going to make a decision where to put their plants for the next 10 years. If they don't have this subsidy, they're going to Europe and other countries. It's just an unbelievable. Maybe it's true, I guess, but it's a shockingly hard sell.
So the idea is to subsidize chip companies, so we'll have a bunch of them in America.
Yes, as far as I know,
not completely crazy. I mean, it's things like this tend to go awry in when you start formulating kind of industrial policy in any sense. It becomes, it gets enmeshed in the political sausage making process and so on. But
somebody else comes up with a better chip, and you're committed to the old technology with $50 billion. So you're slow to adapt, that sort of thing.
Well, I'll tell you who's wishing that they had subsidized chip companies to locate there is Russia. They've got I think, one chip factory of any magnitude, and there's a lot of chips they'd like to be getting for their weapons, that some of which I think they're having trouble. I assume China is helping them out, and that's big time help when it comes to chips. But there are definitely some Western sources they've been relying on that aren't open to them now.
They're in the process of chasing away all their tech talent, I assume.
Well, there's that problem. Yeah.
My impression from our guy who left, and talking to my friend who was a Russian emigre, the word has gone out: leave now while you can. Even if you're not directly threatened, they're going to. Putin's imperial plans are going to require more manpower than he has in the field now. He's going to have to start drafting people and restricting movements. So get out now.
I don't think he has imperial plans, but just getting through this war may call for that.
He has, right. Well, he has whatever plans he have, even if they're minimally imperialist, like just a few little more countries.
Taking over Ukraine.
Like taking over the rest of Ukraine, or maybe one Baltic or two, or a land corridor. He needs more men. Anyway, my impression is that there's a huge brain drain.
Well, yeah, I mean, that happened right at the beginning of the war. Some of them have gone back. There have been stories about that, partly because they have trouble, I think, getting visas to go where they would like to go, including the United States. But no, that's a problem. Look, it's been a problem for a long time. I mean, they lost a lot of Jewish talent right away as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed. And, just because of people escaping anti-Semitism.
My Russian friend also said he was very skeptical about the idea that Putin was irrational, says he's very rational. But part of his rationality is if you let him get away with something, he will then try to take something else.
Sure.
So, but I assume that in your sort of realistic negotiations to end the Ukraine war, that will have set a limit to Putin. He will not have succeeded in taking all of Ukraine, so therefore it won't trigger this voracious "what can I take next?" Or I guess the argument would be that he's getting away with so much that he's going to look for another opportunity.
Yeah, it's kind of a fine balance. I mean, on the one hand, he's unlikely to be enthusiastic about peace talks until he's gotten what I would call his kind of minimal political objectives, in the sense of the minimal thing he promised at the outset that he would do. To get there, he's got to take over the rest of Donetsk, that the other one of the two Donbass provinces. But yeah, the more he does succeed in taking over, the less you would like. I mean, look, I think, let's imagine that happens, and I'm not confident it will. I mean, finding the sweet spot where Ukraine and Russia could agree is very hard. But let's assume there is a negotiated solution in 3-6 months. It even by then will have been far from an obvious win for him. I mean, in other words, far from obvious kind of positive reinforcement. Of course, it depends on the details. How much does he keep? How many, if any, of the sanctions are removed? It depends on a lot of things. But people are going to point out, like, under a lot of the scenarios, they're going to point out, like, wait a second, you said NATO was the problem. You have, let's say, keeps part of the Donbass and so on. Well, okay, you've extended Russia's borders, but now the Ukraine that they abut, what's left of Ukraine, is more closely tied than ever to NATO, could even be a member of NATO. So what have you accomplished? You got
in your interview with Sachs, he said that Ukrainian neutrality was one of the obvious elements of any deal.
Yeah, but see, it's very hard for Ukraine as a political matter to both let Russia keep a bunch of territory and say, oh, in addition, we'll promise to remain neutral. I think that's politically, not that I'm an expert, that seems to me like a hard sell in Ukraine.
It depends how they're doing in the battlefield, right? It's that or die, then probably it has some appeal.
one current scenario is Russia kind of barely hobbles to conquest of Donetsk, because I do think these new, as I mentioned in the Parrot Room last week, these new HIMARS missiles are complicating life for Russia. And the U.S. could turn up the spigot at least a little. I mean, we don't have an infinite supply, but they could have more. So it could be that they slow Russia's momentum sufficiently that it just kind of barely manages to be able to say it's got Donetsk, and then at that point they're ready to deal. I don't.
Well, what do the neocons want to have happen? At one point early in the war, they were saying that the goal is to defeat Russia decisively and humiliate Putin. I don't think that's happening. Have they dropped that illusion, or do they still harbor it?
I think a lot of people still want to roll back the aggression, even beyond February 2022. In other words, push them out of the Donbass entirely,
right,
and conceivably try to push them out of Crimea. Now, I think I think it's impossible to do all of that without courting unacceptable risk of like nuclear war and stuff. But I think that's their a lot of them, a lot of the hawks are still talking that way.
Supposedly Zelensky gave an interview where he admitted they might have to give up some territory.
Did he? Well,
I sent you the link.
If there's just no way you're going to get them out of Crimea and the entirety of the Donbass again without epic war that completely destroys Ukraine in any event. And it's just not, in the cards. I mean, Russia does ultimately have a huge manpower advantage. You got to remember that. They would rather not go for a general mobilization, but if the tide completely turns, I'm sure Putin could pull that off.
Did you have other news you wanted to report? Sorry, I interrupted you when you said you wanted to do a Ukraine update.
No, I think it's still we're in this kind of unclear stage. Russia has slowed their operations kind of, and it's unclear whether they just are taking a breather, as a lot of people had anticipated, or it's because the HIMARS have had such success in destroying Russian ammo depots that they're having to reconstruct their whole logistical system to accommodate that reality now that they have to keep the ammo further away from the border. It's not clear. I mean, they certainly haven't stopped their operations entirely, and they're still making, I think, incremental progress. But I think everybody thinks it's going to be, weeks at a minimum before you see a dramatic development like Kramatorsk, the headquarters of Ukraine's military in Donetsk. You see that fall or anything like that?
Okay, there's one. We're
close to an hour, by the way. So
I know. This point could be dispensed with easily. There were a bunch of articles on prospects for the midterms. In particular, one by Sean Trend, who is the guy I maybe respect most of all the political analysts, because he's the person who first called the fact that the emerging Democratic majority wouldn't necessarily emerge, and that a guy like Trump might conceivably win.
Plus, great last name. Is it Trend?
Right, Trnde. Trnde. And there's talk about the general realignment of the parties, which we can talk about in the Parrot Room, with the Republicans becoming more working class and the Democrats being wine-sipping virtue signalers. But Trend's analysis, which really wasn't as piercing as his usual analysis, he claimed that the Republicans were still favored to win, which maybe they are, but it convinced me it all comes down to Arizona. And I would like to see some polls about J.D. Vance in Ohio, because his opponent, Ryan, is running a very smart campaign where he distances himself from the Democrats. So he's sort of running as a half Trumpist. Vance is running as a 9/10 Trumpist. And it's not clear that Vance has such a huge advantage. So it comes down to the Peter Thiel candidates. The Peter Thiel candidates will decide the fate of the Senate. Assuming Blake Masters wins the Arizona primary. And I don't know. I still think that it's at best even odds that Masters can beat Greg Kelly. So that was just my takeaway from all these pieces was it's all about Arizona.
Okay. Well,
I'm assuming Herschel Walker loses. I'm assuming Dr. Oz loses. I'm assuming that Nevada, the Republicans win. And there just aren't that many swing states. I'm assuming that Johnson wins in Wisconsin. So Arizona is the key thing. So soon everybody in Hollywood is going to be driving to Arizona to phone bank and knock on doors for Greg Kelly.
So in the Parrot Room, I'm going to ask you about that.
Greg Kelly, for Kelly.
I'm going to ask you a little more about Blake Masters and that whole scenario, I think.
You're not going to go into Herman Goring. We already did him.
We did. We handled the Blake Masters Nazi monster ? Headline.
Yeah.
So what more?
Once you know he's a Nazi monster, what is there? Once you know he's not a Nazi monster, what more do you need?
Or that. So I will reveal my Atlantic conspiracy theory and involving Jeffrey Goldberg.
As long as it doesn't involve Jeffrey Goldberg, I was going to say.
I can guarantee you it will involve Jeffrey Goldberg. And let's see, what else? Oh, I mean, why don't I talk about the British Open? We're already on the subject of golf. It's the British Open. I'll talk about it. Okay. I'll talk, and maybe more about the LIV golf circuit. It's a fascinating story. It really, the intersection, it's a new kind of intersection of sports and politics, I think. Anyway.
I don't even know what you're talking about, so.
This golf thing.
I wait.
You await my insights, as always.
With eager anticipation.
They're fascinating.
We have Starbucks closing stores. Are they themselves to blame? We have a Bob-friendly topic of Biden not taking military force against Iran off the table as the Iran negotiations come to a climax.
On the contrary, I do want to talk about that. He signed, he guaranteed Israel in writing that he's willing to attack Iran if necessary. Yeah.
We have some exciting developments, alarming developments in the NAIRU, the NAIRU, the non-accelerating rate of unemployment, non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. I'm sure you'll want to tune in for that. We have, if that doesn't work, we have not the Hunter Biden laptop, but the Hunter Biden cloud, Bob. Even racier than the Hunter Biden laptop. So racy that it was suppressed by 4chan.
Okay. That's pretty racy.
That is pretty racy.
Hunter Cloud.
We have the Iraqi prime minister saying, when Biden meets with me, this is sort of like a phony foreign policy piece, but when Biden meets with me, he's going to be meeting the leader of a democratic, multi-ethnic parliamentary government. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
If that is true, does that mean the Iraq war was worth it? I think you will dissent.
I don't know, but I think Iraq was more multi-ethnic than George Bush realized when he decided to invade. That's for sure. And speaking of which, I want to talk a little more about the Saudi Arabia sucking up stuff, and which is not unrelated to golf, happily. Rare instance of golf geopolitics synergy that I'm just reveling in. Do it a little bit of media criticism, complain about an unbelievably bad Washington Post headline. And then, you and I have long been promising to explain why the word agency drives both of us crazy as often used. We didn't even know if we're talking about the same thing. We haven't even compared notes. There's a reason the word often annoys me and a reason the word often annoys you. And we'll find out if it's the same reason.
I'd love to know why it annoys me because I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, through the clarifying effect of our unique conversational style, Mickey.
Maybe a little discussion of breakfast tacos.
Followed
by
Jill. Explain to me what the faux pas was there. Okay. So
we'll
Jill, Jill breakfast tacos. Jill Biden and breakfast tacos.
Onto an equally appetizing issue of fertilizer, and is that why the Sri Lankan government fell? Because they were trying to stop using
organic fertilizer, folks.
And the unbelievable bloat of Joe Biden's government.
Okay, we got a lot of things. Can we stop? I mean, we're not going to get to all this. You gotta exercise some discipline here.
All right.
And also, and that last one, I got to say,
not my strong point.
From my objective standpoint, the last one sounded kind of boring. Why don't we take that off the list? We're well over an hour. We got to go.
It's an old Washington Monthly point.
Yeah, well,
when things are when there are 560 employees in the executive office of the president, it runs less efficiently than when there are 260.
Okay, good. We've covered that then.
Okay.
All right.
I thought you'd say that.
So anything actually, I don't want to use the word interesting, but, sexier than government bloat? Music?
There's nothing sexier than the Hunter Biden cloud, Bob.
No, that's good. That part's good.
It's pretty much sex from start to finish.
We'll lead with that, folks. So you go to the Parrot Room, patreon.com/Parrot Room, and right away you are in the Hunter Biden cloud, virtually doing the things that Hunter Biden did. Okay?
We'll be weighing our crack and flossing our teeth.
And Mickey's going to go back to flossing. I think that's time to press the stop button. See you in the Parrot Room.